Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it's my 7th year anniversary on this channel. Thank you all so much for sticking around. Those of you who still keep watching, I do appreciate it. But now to the matter at hand. The album from 2019 that y'all voted on is down to the wire, but here it is. From Caroline Polachek, Pang. It's kind of weird how 6 months of doing something completely different makes returning to the familiar feel oddly new. Because while I've been pushing out single reviews pretty regularly since I started on the Pulse when I've got way too damn much to say, which is all the time, going back to a single release for an anniversary review does feel a bit different. And considering how much of a nail-biter the final votes came down for this, I would have wound up in uncharted territory regardless, because it rapidly split between 3 albums. 1000 gecs by 100 gecs, the self-titled Injury Reserve album, and then this project, which eked out the win by a single vote, and it wasn't by my tiebreaker before you could ask. And you know what, even then, I felt like I was kind of in uncharted territory, because while Chairlift had been on my radar as a synth-pop, indie-pop band for a while in the 2010s, they never really attracted that much of my attention, falling into a well-reviewed and likable indie-pop cluster that, I'll admit, I only tend to brush up against if I'm not grabbed by a great single. So when the band broke up and their frontwoman went solo, I wasn't really galvanized to care all that much. Yeah, the critics went bananas for a solo debut, but so what else is new? 2019 was such a wonky year when it came to finding any sort of critical consensus, it was probably just a fluke. And when I checked out her production credits and saw Danny L. Harl and A.G. Cook, known affiliates of PC Music, I mean, it made all the more sense, but also kind of kept me at a distance. I've said this a number of times before, but a lot of the production tones coming out of that camp can be incredibly haphazard and kind of hit and miss. If I'm not always on board with Charlie XCX, what would make this any different? But alright, fine. What did I find on Caroline Polachek's first album under her own name proper, Pang? So, okay, here's the thing. I completely understand why this album got requested for me, because in theory, there's a lot in my natural wheelhouse that falls out. The PC Music production flourishes, they're here, but they're not obtrusive or poorly integrated, and Caroline Polachek has a knack for making some odd compositional flourishes sound accessible in a naturalistic, or dare I even say organic structure, while remaining a really damn potent singer who can bend and contort her voice around that mix. And that's before we get to the content, and the album's very real arc and themes, and all the comparisons I'm going to make to similar acts that I love that made this a way easier sell than I was expecting, which is why it kind of frustrates me that I'm mostly lukewarm on it. Not that it's bad at all, in fact it's really good, but it's an album that slips into the background for me distressingly quickly, and throughout this review I would really like to pin down why, but to do that there are 2 artists that if we're discussing Caroline Polachek, they do spring to mind immediately, especially when it comes to layered electronic composition with an uncanny organic side and just as oblique vocal delivery. Imogen Heap and Anna Meredith. And no, it's not a particularly fair comparison because Imogen Heap has a classic album from the 2000s, and I still hold 2014's Sparks to be one of the most underrated albums of the 2010s. And you know what Anna Meredith is doing in electronic composition is just spellbinding on her last 2 projects. But there are a lot of parallels in how Polachek will bend her classically trained vocal delivery around the melody with slight electronic augmentation, or just throw compositional curveballs like how the key on each verse of New Normal will change, or the 7/4 time signature on Look at Me Now. More to the point, there are a lot of choices that fit the underlying motifs and ideas about the song. New Normal is all about a slippery cascade of life events. Whenever there's some sort of stability, whenever it's found, there's a lurch to move in a very different direction, which is how you can feel on certain relationships. Hell, no straightforward post-breakup dance song, So Hot You're Hurting My Feelings. It's all about hitting that wave of regretful nostalgia. So of course it sounds like flagrant 80s pop rock. And thematically, there's another big parallel to Anna Meredith's last album, Fibs, which was all about building up the courage to embrace and take more risks, move past the little lies that we tell ourselves, and the entire thematic arc of this album really is its calculated risk. Actually, in fact, let's stay here for a bit, because it's hard not to read at least some of the references on this album to the dissolution of Chairlift and Polachek's semi-recent divorce in 2018, where she describes feelings of being caught in forces beyond her control, which can be deeply thrilling, be they internal or external, but also doesn't really allow an escape in the same way, which is why the apathetic breakdown on I Give Up and the hard reconciliation with her past, including where she was the one who likely forced the exit, likely more through passive or subconscious neglect than outright choice, is why it stings so deeply. It's an emotional dampening moment. Now, the back half of this album feels a little bit more traditional, post-breakup, as she explores her own trauma, juxtaposed with overwhelming empathy, where there's a hard realization that even if there was some deception in the relationship, she kind of misses all the wonder of that trick. But now it's all about taking her own agency, not going too fast with a new relationship, maybe even finding some comfort in sense of being alone, and then stepping out into the void to charge through all those doors herself instead of her partner. And that's why the subtle reassurance of Parachute is such a great closer. Even if she's taking that risk and she doesn't quite know who the new songs are going to be about, there's still some real support there. And this is where I think Caroline Polachek really comes into her own as an artist. Not just in how she will throw herself into emotionality without it feeling all that melodramatic, but also in how she creates a sense of adventure with some real wry charm. In terms of mood and intensity, I'm actually reminded a little bit of Kate Bush, especially in how thrilling and emotionally nuanced some of this drama can be. And I'll admit, on content alone, I was really hooked, and I like her poetry too. But man, I wish the production can get all the way there. Now, look, in comparison with a lot of PC music productions, we don't have the overhanging issues of mastering and blown-out abrasion that can be so exasperating for me with that crew. The tones are a lot rounder, the keys are more balanced, and while there are passages like the auto-tune bending around hit me where it hurts, they did kinda grate on my nerves a bit, they are mostly in the minority. But it also highlights a peculiar, often overlooked hiccup in PC music production. The mixes might be huge with the shuddering bass drops, the glassy keys, the sharp percussion, all the warping textured layers around any sort of organic instrumentation. But if there isn't a melodic centerpiece, the mix can start to feel very empty very fast. And while that was intentional on a few cuts here, like I Give Up and the heartbreaking Insomnia, hell, and honestly, in order to amplify the loneliness, you can argue it might have been intentional across the board, but you can also tell that certain songs are relying really heavily on Polachek's voice to carry them, rather than support her to amplify that drama. That's one reason why I really like So Hot You're Hurting My Feelings, even despite being 80s pop rock fluff. It's got that additional melodic foundation in the guitar, as does New Normal and Look at Me Now, even if it can kind of feel a little weedy in the latter case. And it's also where the parallel with Imogen Heap comes back into view, because she does the same thing with Negative Space fairly often, but there also tends to be a little more subtle melodic electronics in her work that Polachek doesn't quite have beyond PC music that might be textured but not particularly tuneful. And especially on the back half of this album where the songs start running a little bit long, I find myself really wishing the instrumentation was less fragmented, especially when there might not be much in the way of a groove, and I'll say it, some parts start to run together a little bit without the vocal line. Although, I will say this, apparently a bunch of songs got swapped onto this project at the very last minute, and it doesn't really break cohesion or the arc of the theme, and I'll give her props for that. But as a whole, you know, I'm reminded a little bit of when y'all wanted me to discuss Pop 2 by Charlie XCX in an anniversary review, and where I wound up a little less over the moon than everyone else, but I still want to recommend Pang. What I suspect is that Caroline Polachek will use this as a springboard to more sounds and styles in her solo output. This is transitional on both sound and content, and I absolutely believe that her best is yet to come here. But still, this is really promising, and while I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, I am going to pay a lot of attention to whatever she releases next, because this reflects a ton of character and craft, one hell of a frontwoman. I want to hear more. If you haven't gotten around to hearing this, make the time, check this out. It's real good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Once again, thank you all so much for sticking around 7 years. I know a lot of you don't watch every review. I get it. I kind of wish more of you watched every episode of On the Pulse. Just check out more unique stuff, but hey, I get it. If it's not something you recognize, might not always have the same attraction. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys have thoughts on this album, leave it in the comments down there below. Also, make sure you check out the community tab on occasion, where I will be posting the occasional update of stuff that I'm doing both on the channel, IGTV, or maybe elsewhere. And beyond that, if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where, again, no obligation to do it. It's hard times for everyone out there, but if you want to, the option's available. But until then, once again, thank you all so much. I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.